Commander Sarah Mitchell adjusted her civilian clothes one last time before stepping out of her rental car. The upscale restaurant in downtown San Diego buzzed with Friday night energy, its warm lights spilling onto the sidewalk. She had chosen this place carefully for her date with Marcus, a software engineer she'd met through a dating app. After 3 months of deployment in classified operations, she craved normalcy. Sarah walked through the restaurant's entrance, her trained eyes automatically scanning exits and potential threats. Years of military conditioning never truly switched off. She spotted Marcus at their reserved table, waving enthusiastically. He looked exactly like his photos, brown hair, kind eyes, and a nervous smile that made her feel hopeful about civilian dating. "You look amazing," Marcus said as she approached, standing to pull out her chair. Sarah wore a simple black dress and minimal makeup, her shoulder-length auburn hair falling naturally. Most people would never guess that beneath her delicate appearance lay the tactical mind that had orchestrated some of the Navy's most sensitive operations. The conversation flowed easily. Marcus talked about his work developing security software for banks, while Sarah carefully navigated around her own career. She had perfected the art of being vague about her job without lying outright. Government consulting usually satisfied most people's curiosity without triggering follow-up questions. At the neighboring table, 4 women in their late 20s were celebrating someone's birthday. Their laughter grew progressively louder as the evening wore on, fueled by multiple rounds of cocktails. Sarah noticed them peripherally, the way she noticed everything, but paid them no special attention until their conversation took an ugly turn. "Look at Miss Perfect over there," one of them said, loud enough for Sarah to hear. The speaker was a blonde woman in a tight pink dress, her words slightly slurred. "Probably thinks she's better than everyone else." Sarah glanced over briefly, making eye contact for just a second before returning her attention to Marcus, who was telling a funny story about his cat. She had learned long ago to pick her battles, especially when alcohol was involved. Some situations required strategic withdrawal rather than engagement. "I bet she's one of those uptight corporate types," another woman chimed in, a brunette with heavy makeup. "The kind who reports people to HR for breathing wrong." Marcus seemed oblivious to the commentary from the next table, continuing his story about how his cat had somehow learned to open doors. Sarah smiled and nodded, but part of her attention remained on the escalating situation nearby. Her military training had taught her to monitor potential threats, and drunk, hostile civilians definitely qualified. The birthday girl wearing a glittery tiara stood up unsteadily. "You know what? I'm going to go talk to her, find out what her deal is." "Jessica, sit down," the 4th woman said, trying to be the voice of reason. "Leave them alone." But Jessica was already moving, weaving between tables with the determined stride of someone who had made a decision they would likely regret. She stopped directly beside Sarah and Marcus's table, swaying slightly. "Excuse me," Jessica said, her voice artificially sweet. "My friends and I were wondering what you do for work. You just have this vibe about you." Sarah looked up calmly, her expression neutral but alert. "I work for the government," she said simply, hoping the conversation would end there. "Government, huh?" Jessica's tone turned mocking. "Let me guess, you're one of those people who thinks they're saving the world from behind a desk, right? Processing paperwork and feeling important." Marcus finally picked up on the tension. "Hey, we're just trying to have dinner here," he said, his voice uncertain but protective. Jessica ignored him completely, her focus entirely on Sarah. "I bet you've never done anything real in your life, never gotten your hands dirty, never put yourself on the line for anything that actually matters." The words stung more than Sarah showed. In the past 6 months alone, she had led operations that had saved countless lives, prevented terrorist attacks, and neutralized threats that the public would never even know existed. But she couldn't say any of that. Her work lived in shadows and classified files, in the grateful but silent nods of higher-ups who could never publicly acknowledge what she did. "You're probably right," Sarah said evenly, taking a sip of her wine. Sometimes the best response to aggression was to diffuse it by agreeing. Let people think what they wanted if it meant avoiding unnecessary conflict. But her calm response only seemed to inflame Jessica further. "God, you're pathetic. Sitting there acting all superior when you're probably just another government drone pushing papers around." The entire restaurant seemed to quiet down, other diners turning to watch the unfolding drama. Sarah could feel dozens of eyes on her, could sense the discomfort rippling through the room. Marcus looked mortified, clearly wanting to leave but not knowing how to extract them from the situation gracefully. Sarah's training kicked in. She assessed the threat level, minimal physical danger, but significant potential for public embarrassment. Jessica was drunk, emotional, and looking for a target for whatever personal frustrations were driving her behavior. The smart play was to de-escalate and withdraw. "I think maybe we should call it a night," Sarah said to Marcus, reaching for her purse. "This doesn't seem like the right environment for a quiet dinner." But as she started to stand, Jessica made a decision that would change everything. Whether it was the alcohol, the public attention, or just a fundamental lack of good judgment, she grabbed Sarah's full wine glass and threw the contents directly at her face. The red wine splashed across Sarah's dress, dripped from her hair, and stained her skin. The restaurant fell completely silent, the kind of shocked quiet that follows when someone crosses a line everyone thought was clearly marked. "Drink it, bitch," Jessica shouted, her friends gasping in horror behind her. "How's that for getting your hands dirty?" Sarah stood completely still for a moment, wine dripping from her chin onto her ruined dress. She felt the familiar calm that always descended in crisis moments, her mind automatically shifting into tactical mode. Every instinct trained into her by years of military service wanted to respond, to neutralize the threat, to establish dominance and control. But she was a civilian tonight. Her cover depended on staying in character, on being just another woman having dinner with her date. No matter how thoroughly Jessica had humiliated her, no matter how the entire restaurant was staring at her with mixtures of pity and curiosity, she had to maintain the facade. Marcus jumped up, grabbing napkins and looking absolutely stricken. "Oh my God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. Here, let me." "It's fine," Sarah said quietly, accepting the napkins with steady hands. She wiped wine from her face with mechanical precision, her expression unreadable. "These things happen." Jessica stood there looking suddenly uncertain, as if she was just now realizing what she had done. Her friends had gone completely silent, their celebration mood thoroughly destroyed. The brunette was pulling out her phone, probably to call an Uber before the situation got any worse. "Maybe we should go," the voice of reason friend said urgently, tugging at Jessica's arm. "Now." But Jessica seemed frozen, staring at Sarah with a mixture of defiance and dawning regret. Perhaps she had expected screaming, tears, or retaliation. Sarah's calm acceptance of the assault seemed to unnerve her more than anger would have. Sarah continued methodically cleaning wine from her skin and hair, her movements controlled and efficient. She looked like someone accustomed to dealing with unexpected situations, someone who had faced much worse than drunk women throwing drinks, which, of course, she had. "I said it's fine," Sarah repeated when Marcus continued apologizing and fussing with napkins. "Really, no permanent damage done." The restaurant manager appeared at their table, looking flustered and apologetic. "Ma'am, I am so sorry about this incident. Of course, your meal is on the house and will cover your dry cleaning costs. If you'd like, we can call the police." "That won't be necessary," Sarah interrupted smoothly. "Accidents happen." Jessica finally found her voice again. "It wasn't an accident," she said, though she sounded less certain now. "I meant to do it. You were sitting there acting like you're so much better than everyone else, and I wanted to knock you down a peg." Sarah looked at her for a long moment, her green eyes steady and unblinking. When she spoke, her voice was soft but carried an undertone that made everyone listening unconsciously straighten up. "Mission accomplished," she said simply. There was something in those two words, in the way she said them, that made Jessica take an involuntary step backward. For just a moment, Sarah had let a tiny fraction of her real self show through the civilian mask. Not enough to blow her cover, but enough to remind herself who she actually was beneath the wine-stained dress and public humiliation. Marcus was still hovering anxiously, clearly out of his depth in this situation. "Sarah, should we leave? I can drive you home, or we could go to my place so you can clean up properly." "Home sounds good," Sarah agreed, gathering her purse and the remnants of her dignity. She turned to the manager. "Thank you for your concern, but there's really nothing more to be done here." As they prepared to leave, Jessica called out one more time. "That's right, run away, just like I thought, all talk and no spine." Sarah paused in her exit, turning back one final time. Her expression was still calm, still controlled, but there was something different in her eyes now. something that made Jessica's friends grab her arms and start physically pulling her toward the door. "You're absolutely right," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the restaurant. "I definitely don't have the spine for this kind of thing." She walked out into the night air, Marcus trailing behind her with questions he didn't quite dare ask. Behind them, Jessica and her friends fled in the opposite direction, their evening of celebration thoroughly ruined by an encounter they would never fully understand. Sarah stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting the cool air wash over her wine-sticky skin. Tomorrow, she would return to her real life, to responsibilities and authority that Jessica couldn't even imagine. But tonight, she was just another woman who had been publicly humiliated by a stranger's cruelty. The irony wasn't lost on her. If Jessica only knew who she had just dumped wine on, if she had any idea of the power and responsibility that came with Sarah's real position, she would probably die of embarrassment. But that knowledge would have to remain Sarah's secret, locked away with all the other truths she couldn't share. As Marcus drove her home, asking worried questions about whether she was okay, Sarah stared out the window and planned her return to duty on Monday morning. She had a job to do, people to protect, and a reputation to maintain. What had happened tonight was just another test of her ability to stay in character under pressure. She had passed that test, but barely. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she was already looking forward to the moment when Jessica would inevitably learn the truth about exactly who she had chosen to humiliate. Monday morning arrived gray and overcast, matching Sarah's mood as she drove through the gates of Naval Base Coronado. The weekend had given her time to process Friday night's humiliation, but the sting of Jessica's words still lingered. She had spent years proving herself in a male-dominated field, earning respect through competence and dedication, only to be reduced to assumptions about her character by a drunk stranger. The security guard at the base entrance snapped to attention when he saw her approaching vehicle. "Good morning, Commander Mitchell," he said crisply, scanning her identification even though he knew exactly who she was. "Morning, Rodriguez," Sarah replied, nodding the fresh haircut and pressed uniform. She made it a point to know the names of everyone who worked on base, from the highest-ranking officers to the maintenance staff. Leadership meant recognizing the value of every person in the operation. Her first stop was the secure briefing room where her team was already assembled. 12 of the Navy's most elite SEALs sat around a polished conference table, their attention immediately focusing on her as she entered. These were men who had served in the most dangerous operations around the world, who had proven themselves in combat situations that would break most people, and they looked to her for guidance and leadership. "Good morning, gentlemen," Sarah said, setting her briefing materials on the table. "I hope everyone enjoyed their weekend because we've got work to do." Lieutenant Commander Jake Stevens, her second-in-command, stood up slightly. "Morning, Commander. We've received preliminary intelligence on the shipping container situation in Long Beach. Looks like it might be more complicated than initially reported." Sarah nodded, pulling up satellite imagery on the room's main screen. "Let's dive in. What do we know about the timeline?" For the next hour, they worked through tactical scenarios and intelligence reports. Sarah moved through the complex strategic planning with the ease of someone who had been doing this work for over a decade. She coordinated with multiple intelligence agencies, analyzed threat assessments, and developed contingency plans for a dozen different potential outcomes. Her phone buzzed with a text message, which she ignored until there was a brief break in the briefing. Glancing down, she saw it was from Marcus, checking to see if she was feeling better after Friday night's incident. She typed back a quick response reassuring him that she was fine, then immediately returned her attention to the mission planning. Chief Petty Officer Michael Torres noticed her momentary distraction. "Everything all right, Commander?" "Fine," Sarah said, sliding her phone into her pocket. "Just civilian life bleeding over. Where were we on the harbor approach routes?" The meeting continued for another 2 hours, covering everything from equipment specifications to communication protocols. Sarah's team respected her not just because of her rank, but because she consistently demonstrated tactical knowledge that rivaled or exceeded their own. She had earned her position by being better prepared, more thorough, and more innovative than her competition. As the briefing concluded, Stevens approached her privately. "Commander, I wanted to mention that Admiral Carson's office called this morning. Apparently, there's some kind of community relations event this week that needs a senior officer representative." Sarah sighed internally. Community relations events were a necessary part of military life, but they always felt like a distraction from real work. What kind of event? Some kind of charity thing downtown. I think it's related to veteran support services. They specifically requested someone from our unit because of the recent positive press coverage. Send me the details and I'll review them, Sarah said, though I'd prefer to focus on operational readiness rather than photo opportunities. Understood, ma'am. I'll forward everything to your office. The rest of Monday passed in a blur of meetings, reports, and tactical reviews. Sarah found herself staying late to catch up on paperwork, something that had become increasingly common as her responsibilities expanded. By the time she left base, it was nearly 8 in the evening. Tuesday brought an unexpected development. Sarah was reviewing intelligence reports when her assistant knocked on her office door. "Commander, there's a woman here to see you. She says it's urgent and personal, but she won't give her name to anyone except you directly." Sarah looked up, puzzled. Very few civilians had access to the base, and even fewer would be allowed to request personal meetings with commanding officers. Did she say what this was regarding? No, ma'am, but she seems quite distressed. Security has already verified her credentials for base access, so she's legitimate, but beyond that. Sarah's curiosity was piqued. Send her in. A few minutes later, her assistant escorted a young woman into the office. Sarah immediately recognized her as the voice of reason friend from Friday night's restaurant incident, the one who had tried to stop Jessica from making a scene. "Commander Mitchell," the woman said hesitantly, "I'm Kelly Chen, I think we need to talk about what happened Friday night." Sarah's expression remained neutral, though internally she was calculating potential security implications. "I'm sorry, but I think you might have me confused with someone else. I don't recall meeting you before." Kelly shook her head, looking increasingly upset. "Please don't pretend. I know it was you at Romano's restaurant. My friend Jessica threw wine at you, and God, I am so sorry. I had no idea who you were until yesterday." "And how exactly did you figure out who I was?" Sarah asked carefully. "My brother," Kelly said, sitting down heavily in the chair across from Sarah's desk. "He's Petty Officer Second Class David Chen, stationed here at Coronado. I was telling him about Friday night, about how this woman handled Jessica's behavior with such incredible composure, and I described you. He said you sounded familiar, so I showed him the picture I took on my phone. I was trying to document Jessica's behavior in case charges were filed." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. Security protocols, operational security, the potential for compromise of her cover identity for future civilian operations. "David recognized you immediately," Kelly continued. "He told me exactly who you are, what you do, and why I should be absolutely mortified about what happened. Commander, I am so sorry. Jessica had no idea, and honestly, neither did I, but that doesn't excuse anything." "What exactly did your brother tell you about what I do?" Sarah asked. "He said you command one of the most elite SEAL teams in the Navy, that you've been decorated multiple times for classified operations that he can't even talk about, that the men you lead would follow you into hell without question because you've proven yourself in ways that most people couldn't even imagine." Kelly's voice was getting more emotional as she spoke. "He said you've saved more lives than most people will ever know, and that you're considered one of the most competent tactical commanders in the entire Navy. And Jessica? God, Jessica called you pathetic. She said you'd never done anything real, never put yourself on the line for anything that mattered." Sarah remained silent, watching Kelly struggle with her obvious distress and embarrassment. "I keep thinking about how you handled it," Kelly went on. "You didn't fight back, didn't cause a scene, didn't use your authority or training or whatever to put Jessica in her place. You just took it and walked away. David said that level of self-control under pressure is exactly what makes you such an effective leader." "Your brother sounds like a good sailor," Sarah said finally, "but I think he might be overstating my importance." "No, he's not," Kelly said firmly. "I did some research after he told me who you were. Obviously, most of your work is classified, but your public record is impressive enough. Naval Academy graduate, multiple combat tour, the youngest woman ever promoted to her current position. You've dedicated your entire adult life to serving your country." Kelly stood up, packing to the window that overlooked the training facilities. "Do you know what Jessica does for work? She's an Instagram influencer. She makes money posting pictures of herself wearing clothes and makeup that companies send her. and she had the audacity to lecture you about never doing anything real. Ms. Chen, Sarah said gently, people don't know what they don't know. Your friend had no way of understanding my background, and honestly, that's how it's supposed to be. My ability to blend into civilian situations is actually an important part of my job. But it's not fair, Kelly protested. You protect people like Jessica every single day, and she treated you like garbage. You risk your life so that she can live safely enough to worry about Instagram followers and birthday parties, and she repaid that by humiliating you in public. Sarah stood up and walked around her desk to face Kelly directly. Can I tell you something that might help put this in perspective? In my line of work, we often have to make sacrifices that go unrecognized. We do things that can't be publicly acknowledged, and we accept criticism from people who don't understand the bigger picture. Friday night was just another example of that. But it was so unfair, Kelly said, tears starting in her eyes. Fair isn't really the point, Sarah replied. Effective is the point. Keeping people safe is the point. Maintaining operational security is the point. What your friend did to me was unpleasant, but it wasn't dangerous. I've dealt with much worse situations with much higher stakes. Kelly looked at her with something approaching awe. How do you do it? How do you stay so calm when people are treating you badly? Training helps, Sarah said with a slight smile. But mostly, it's about keeping perspective on what really matters. Your friend's opinion of me doesn't change my ability to do my job or protect the people I'm responsible for. It doesn't diminish the value of the work my team does or the trust that my superiors have placed in me. I still feel terrible about it, Kelly said. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you coming here to apologize. But you weren't the one who threw wine at me. You don't need to carry responsibility for someone else's poor choices. Kelly nodded, wiping her eyes. Is there anything I can do to make this right? Anything at all? Sarah considered the question carefully. Actually, there might be. But first, I need to ask you something important. Can I trust you to keep what you've learned about me completely confidential? My ability to operate effectively sometimes depends on people not knowing who I am or what I do. Of course, Kelly said immediately. David already gave me a lecture about operational security. I understand that this conversation never happened. Good, Sarah said. Now about making things right. I believe you mentioned that your friend is an influencer with a significant social media following. Kelly nodded cautiously. She has about 50,000 followers on Instagram. Sarah smiled, and for the first time there was something slightly predatory in the expression. Then I think I might have an idea for how this situation could be educational for everyone involved. The community relations event that Stevens had mentioned turned out to be perfect timing. Sarah reviewed the details Wednesday morning while sipping coffee in her office. The Heroes Among Us charity gala was scheduled for Friday evening at the Grand Hyatt downtown, the same hotel that, coincidentally, housed one of San Diego's most popular rooftop bars. Sarah picked up her phone and called Kelly Chen. Ms. Chen, this is Commander Mitchell. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Of course, Commander. Is everything all right? Everything's fine. I wanted to follow up on our conversation yesterday about making things right. Are you free Friday evening? Yes, I think so. What did you have in mind? There's a charity event downtown that I need to attend for work. It's a fundraiser for veteran support services, and it's open to the public if people want to purchase tickets. I was thinking you might want to bring your friend Jessica. Kelly was quiet for a moment. I'm not sure she'd be interested in a charity event, Commander. That's not really her scene. Well, here's the thing, Sarah said, leaning back in her chair. The event is being held at the Grand Hyatt, which has a very popular rooftop bar. I happen to know that your friend frequently posts from trendy locations around the city. A quick check of her Instagram shows she was at that exact rooftop bar just 2 weeks ago. Oh, Kelly said, understanding beginning to dawn in her voice. The charity event runs from 6 to 8 in the evening. The rooftop bar gets busy around 9. I'm thinking that if someone happened to be at that bar Friday night, and if they happened to encounter someone from the charity event who was still wearing their name tag and medals. You want her to see you, Kelly said. You want her to realize who she threw wine at. I want her to learn something, Sarah corrected. About making assumptions, about treating people with basic respect, about understanding that she doesn't know everything about the people around her. Whether she learns that lesson depends entirely on how she chooses to react to new information. Kelly was quiet again, thinking it through. What exactly do you want me to do? Just be a good friend. Suggest a fun night out at a popular spot. Let her make her own choices about how to behave when she encounters new situations. I'll handle the rest. And you're sure this won't? I mean, you're not planning to embarrass her the way she embarrassed you, are you? Sarah's voice was firm but reassuring. Ms. Chen, I'm a military officer. I don't engage in petty revenge schemes, but I do believe in education and personal growth opportunities. Your friend demonstrated some concerning attitudes about service members and public employees. Perhaps meeting some real examples of both will broaden her perspective. Thursday was spent in final preparations. Sarah attended the usual briefings and operational meetings, but part of her mind was focused on Friday's plan. She wasn't seeking revenge. That would be beneath her position and training. But she was interested in creating a learning opportunity that might prevent Jessica from treating other people the same way in the future. Stevens knocked on her office door around 3 in the afternoon. Commander, Admiral Carson's office just called. They want to make sure you understand how important tomorrow night's event is for community relations. Apparently, there's going to be local media coverage, and they want our unit represented positively. Understood, Sarah said. I'll make sure to bring my dress blues and medals, full formal military presentation. They also mentioned that you might be asked to give brief comments about the Navy's commitment to veteran services. Are you prepared for that? Always, Sarah replied. She had given hundreds of public speeches over the years, from military award ceremonies to congressional briefings. Speaking to a civilian audience about veteran support would be straightforward. Friday evening arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures. Sarah arrived at the Grand Hyatt at exactly 6 o'clock, wearing her dress blue uniform with full decorations. The Navy Cross, Silver Star, and Purple Heart were prominently displayed among her other medals, awards that told the story of a career spent in service to her country, though they only hinted at the classified operations that had earned them. The hotel's main ballroom had been transformed into an elegant fundraising venue. Local dignitaries, veteran service organization representatives, and community leaders mingled, while a string quartet played patriotic music. Sarah moved through the crowd with practiced ease, discussing veteran employment programs with the mayor, homeless services with local nonprofits, and education benefits with university representatives. Around 7:30, a local news crew approached her for an interview. Commander Mitchell, can you tell our viewers about the Navy's current initiatives for supporting veterans transitioning to civilian life? Absolutely, Sarah said, looking directly into the camera with the confidence of someone accustomed to speaking on important topics. Military service members develop exceptional skills during their time in uniform, leadership, problem-solving under pressure, teamwork, and a commitment to mission accomplishment. Our job is to help veterans translate those skills into civilian careers where they can continue contributing to their communities. The reporter followed up with questions about specific programs and statistics, which Sarah answered with the detailed knowledge expected of her position. The entire interview lasted about 10 minutes and would be broadcast on the 11 o'clock news. As 8 o'clock approached and the formal event began winding down, Sarah made her strategic move. Instead of leaving the hotel, she took the elevator to the rooftop bar. Her dress, uniform, and medals drew immediate attention from other patrons, but she simply ordered a club soda and positioned herself at a table with a clear view of the entrance. She didn't have to wait long. Kelly and Jessica arrived at 9:15, dressed for a night out in short dresses and high heels. Jessica was already animated, probably having pre-gamed before arriving. She was gesturing widely as she told some story to Kelly, clearly enjoying being the center of attention. Sarah watched as they found a table across the bar, noting that Jessica immediately pulled out her phone to start taking selfies with the city skyline in the background. The social media documentation had begun, which meant Jessica was already mentally committed to staying for at least an hour to get enough content for multiple posts. Kelly spotted Sarah almost immediately, but was careful not to react obviously. Instead, she subtly guided their conversation and positioning so that Jessica would eventually notice the uniformed woman sitting alone at a nearby table. It took about 20 minutes. Jessica was in the middle of taking photos when she paused, lowering her phone to look more closely at Sarah. Her expression shifted from casual interest to confusion, then to growing recognition. Kelly, Jessica said quietly, grabbing her friend's arm. That woman over there in the military uniform, she looks really familiar. Kelly followed Jessica's gaze with feigned casualness. Oh yeah, she does look familiar. Where do you think you know her from? Jessica was starring now, trying to place the face. Sarah continued sipping her club soda and occasionally checking her phone, appearing unaware of the scrutiny. She was, of course, fully aware of every detail of Jessica's body language and growing agitation. I know I've seen her somewhere recently, Jessica muttered. But I can't figure out where, and why is she wearing all those medals? She looks pretty young to be some kind of war hero. Maybe you should ask her, Kelly suggested innocently. She looks friendly enough. No way, Jessica said immediately. I don't talk to military people. They're all weird about their service and try to make everyone else feel guilty for not enlisting. Sarah had to suppress a smile at that comment. It was exactly the kind of prejudicial thinking that had led to Friday night's incident, and it was about to be challenged in a very direct way. Besides, Jessica continued, she's probably just some desk jockey who bought those medals online. Real combat veterans don't hang out at trendy bars wearing their uniforms. Kelly raised an eyebrow. That's a pretty harsh assumption, Jess. How can you tell just by looking at her? Trust me, I know these types. They join the military because they can't make it in the real world, then they spend their whole lives acting like they're special because they wore a uniform. She's probably never seen real combat in her life. Sarah decided it was time to provide some education. She stood up, straightened her uniform jacket, and walked directly to Jessica and Kelly's table. Excuse me, she said politely. I couldn't help but notice you looking over at my table. I'm Commander Sarah Mitchell, and I believe we've met before. Jessica looked up at her with confused recognition dawning on her face. Up close, with the uniform and medals, there was no mistaking who this was. Jessica started, then stopped, the color draining from her face. The woman you threw wine at last Friday night, Sarah finished calmly. Though I believe your exact words were "drink it, bitch," before telling me I'd never done anything real or put myself on the line for anything that mattered. Kelly watched the exchange with barely concealed fascination, curious to see how her friend would handle this moment of truth. Jessica's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound came out. You're actually, I mean you really are. A Navy SEAL commander, yes, Sarah said, still maintaining her polite tone. I lead tactical operations that I can't discuss in detail, but I can tell you that my team and I have spent the last several years putting ourselves on the line for things that matter quite a bit. She gestured to her medals. The Navy Cross is for extraordinary heroism in combat. The Silver Star is for gallantry in action against an enemy force. The Purple Heart is for being wounded while serving. I received these for specific operations where my team and I prevented terrorist attacks that would have killed American civilians. Jessica was staring at the medals now, her face growing paler by the minute. But you're right about one thing, Sarah continued. I have spent some time behind a desk. Planning those operations requires quite a bit of paperwork, though I suspect that's not exactly what you meant when you called me a pathetic government drone. The bar had grown quiet around them, other patrons sensing the tension and drama unfolding at the corner table. Several people had their phones out, though whether they were recording or just pretending to be busy was unclear. I had no idea, Jessica finally managed to say. You were dressed like a regular person and you seemed so, I mean you didn't act like. Like what? Sarah asked. Like someone who demands respect based on their position, like someone who can't handle criticism, like someone who needs to prove their worth to strangers in restaurants. Jessica nodded mutely. That's because real confidence doesn't need external validation, Sarah explained. Real strength doesn't require proving itself to people who don't matter. Real leadership means staying calm under pressure and choosing your battles wisely. She pulled out a business card and placed it on the table in front of Jessica. This has my office contact information, not because I expect you to call, but because I want you to remember that you never know who you're talking to or what their story might be. The next time you decide to judge someone based on assumptions, remember that you once called a decorated combat veteran pathetic because she didn't fit your idea of what strength looks like. Sarah turned to go, then paused and looked back. Oh, and Jessica, thank you for the lesson in civilian behavior. It reminded me why the work my team and I do matters so much. Protecting the freedom of people like you to make whatever choices you want, even poor ones, is exactly what we swore to do." With that, she walked away, leaving Jessica staring at the business card with shaking hands, while the entire rooftop bar buzzed with whispered conversations about what they had just witnessed. Sarah was halfway to the elevator when she heard rapid footsteps behind her. She turned to see Jessica hurrying after her, Kelly close behind looking both worried and curious about what would happen next. "Commander Mitchell, please wait," Jessica called out, slightly out of breath. Can I please talk to you for a minute?" Sarah stopped, studying Jessica's face. The arrogance and hostility from a week ago were completely gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine distress and confusion. "Of course. What can I do for you?" "I need to apologize," Jessica said, her words coming out in a rush. "Not just for throwing wine at you, but for everything I said, for assuming I knew anything about you or your life, for being so completely wrong about everything." "I appreciate that," Sarah said. "Apology accepted." But Jessica wasn't finished. "No, you don't understand. It's not just about apologizing. It's about understanding how incredibly messed up my thinking was. I spent years judging people based on nothing, making assumptions about their worth based on my own limited experience." She gestured helplessly at Sarah's uniform and medals. "I saw someone who looked put together and successful, and instead of being inspired or curious, I got angry. I decided you must think you're better than everyone else, when really I was the one thinking I was better than you." Kelly stepped forward slightly. "Jess, maybe we should sit down somewhere quieter to talk about this." "No," Jessica said firmly. "I want to say this here now while I'm seeing clearly. Commander, when I looked at you last Friday, I saw everything I was insecure about in myself. You seemed confident and self-possessed, and instead of admitting that I wanted those qualities, I told myself you were probably fake or putting on an act." Sarah listened carefully, recognizing genuine self-reflection when she heard it. "What changed your mind?" "Seeing you now in uniform, understanding what you actually do. It made me realize how small and petty my world has become. I spend my days worrying about Instagram followers and brand partnerships and whether my content is getting enough engagement. And I convinced myself that was real work, that it mattered." Jessica's voice was getting more emotional. "But you've been out there literally saving lives while I've been taking selfies. You've been serving your country while I've been serving myself. And when we met, instead of recognizing strength and character, I attacked it because it made me feel bad about my own choices." "MS," Sarah paused, realizing she had never learned Jessica's last name. "Thompson, Jessica Thompson." "Ms. Thompson, can I offer you some perspective? There's nothing inherently wrong with social media or influencer marketing. It's a legitimate career that brings joy to people who follow your content. The problem wasn't your job or your lifestyle. It was your assumption that you could judge someone else's worth based on limited information." Jessica nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. "But it's not just about that night. It's about realizing that I've been living in this bubble where I think my problems and my world are the center of everything. I get upset about negative comments on my posts while you're dealing with life and death situations that could affect thousands of people. Different people have different responsibilities and different scales of impact," Sarah said gently. "The key is understanding that your experience isn't universal, and other people's lives might be very different from what you imagine." "How do you do it?" Jessica asked suddenly. "How do you stay so calm when someone is attacking you unfairly? Last Friday, I was saying terrible things to you and you just absorbed it. Even now, you're being kind to me when I don't deserve it." Sarah considered the question carefully. "Part of it is training, but mostly it's perspective. I've seen real threats, real enemies, real life and death situations. A drunk woman throwing wine at me in a restaurant isn't dangerous, it's just unpleasant. Getting angry about it wouldn't change anything or help anyone." "But weren't you hurt? Not physically, but emotionally. I was attacking your character, your worth as a person." "You were attacking your perception of my character," Sarah corrected. "But you didn't know my actual character, so your opinion couldn't really hurt it. You were essentially angry at a fictional version of me that existed only in your head." Jessica wiped at her eyes, smearing her carefully applied makeup. "I want to do something to make this right. I know an apology isn't enough for what I did. Is there anything I can do to actually help, to contribute something positive?" Sarah thought for a moment, then smiled slightly. "Actually, there might be. You mentioned that you have a significant social media following. Have you ever used your platform to promote causes you care about? Sometimes, but usually just things like animal shelters or environmental stuff. Basic feel-good content that doesn't require much thought or effort. What if you used your platform to actually educate people? To share stories about veterans, about service members, about the kinds of people who might not look like what your followers expect them to look like? Kelly stepped in, looking interested. That's actually a really good idea. Jess has great engagement rates and her audience trusts her recommendations. I don't know anything about the military or veteran issues, Jessica protested. How could I talk about things I don't understand? By learning, Sarah said simply. By doing research, by talking to veterans, by visiting organizations that support service members, by being honest about your own ignorance and your journey to understand better. Jessica nodded slowly, the idea taking shape in her mind. You're talking about using what happened between us as a teaching moment, admitting that I made assumptions and showing how I'm trying to do better. Only if you're genuinely committed to doing better, Sarah warned. This can't be a performative gesture for social media content. It would need to be real learning, real growth, real commitment to understanding perspectives outside your current experience. I want to do it, Jessica said immediately. I want to learn. I want to understand what service actually means, what sacrifice actually looks like. I want to stop being the kind of person who attacks someone for imaginary slights. Sarah pulled out another business card and wrote something on the back. This is the contact information for Maria Santos, who runs Veteran Employment Services here in San Diego. She could help connect you with veterans who might be willing to share their stories, but approach with respect and genuine curiosity, not like you're doing them a favor by giving them attention. Jessica took the card carefully, holding it like something precious. Thank you. I promise I'll take this seriously. There's one more thing, Sarah said. If you do decide to share your story publicly about what happened between us and what you learned from it, I need you to keep my specific identity and position confidential. I can't have my operational security compromised for social media content. Of course, Jessica said quickly. I would never do anything to put you or your team at risk. Could I refer to you generically, like a service member I met or something like that? That would be appropriate, Sarah agreed. Kelly had been listening to the entire exchange with growing amazement. Jess, this could actually be really powerful content, showing your followers that it's okay to admit when you're wrong, that personal growth matters more than being right all the time. It's not about the content, Jessica said, though she was clearly thinking about the possibilities. It's about actually becoming a better person. The content would just be documentation of that process. Sarah checked her watch. I should probably head home. Early morning tomorrow, and my team is depending on me to be sharp. Commander, Jessica said as Sarah turned to go. Thank you for your service, obviously, but also for teaching me something important about myself. I won't forget this lesson. Just remember it when you encounter other people who don't fit your expectations, Sarah replied. Everyone has a story you don't know. As Sarah walked toward the elevator, she could hear Jessica and Kelly already discussing plans for research and outreach. Whether Jessica would follow through on her commitment remained to be seen, but Sarah was cautiously optimistic. Sometimes the most important victories happen not in combat zones, but in moments when people chose to grow beyond their limitations. The elevator doors closed behind her, and Sarah allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. She had managed to turn a humiliating encounter into a teaching moment without compromising her position or principles. More importantly, she might have helped someone develop the kind of perspective that would prevent them from treating others with similar prejudice in the future. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Stevens. Admiral Carson wants a brief on tomorrow's operation moved to 700 hours. Also, the news coverage of tonight's charity event was excellent. You represented the unit well. Sarah typed back her confirmation, then headed home to prepare for another day of protecting people who might never know her name or understand the sacrifices made on their behalf. It was exactly the job she had signed up for, and exactly the responsibility she was proud to carry. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, and new opportunities to serve. But tonight had reminded her why the work mattered, not just for national security or strategic objectives, but for the individual people whose freedom to make their own choices, even poor ones, depended on others being willing to protect them. Jessica Thompson might never fully understand the complexity of Sarah's world, but she had taken the first step toward recognizing that other people's worlds might be more complex than she had previously imagined. And sometimes, that recognition was the beginning of wisdom. 3 weeks after the rooftop bar encounter, Sarah was deep in mission planning when her assistant knocked on her office door with an unusual request. "Commander, there's a journalist from the San Diego Tribune here. She says she's working on a feature story about local veterans and specifically requested to interview you. She mentioned it's related to some social media campaign that's been gaining attention." Sarah looked up from her tactical maps, puzzled. "I haven't authorized any media interviews. What's social media campaign?" She mentioned something about an influencer who's been highlighting veteran stories. Apparently, it's been getting a lot of positive attention, and now traditional media wants to cover the broader story. Sarah's curiosity was piqued. "Send her in, but let her know I can only discuss general topics, nothing classified or operational." The journalist, a middle-aged woman named Rebecca Martinez, entered with a warm smile and professional demeanor. "Commander Mitchell, thank you for seeing me on short notice. I'm working on a story about an interesting social media trend that's been bringing attention to veteran issues in our community." "What kind of trend?" Sarah asked, though she had a growing suspicion about where this was heading. "Have you seen any of the recent content from Jessica Thompson? She's a local influencer who's been sharing veteran stories and educational content about military service. What makes it unusual is that she's been very open about her own previous ignorance and biases." Rebecca pulled out her phone and showed Sarah several Instagram posts. The content was professionally produced but genuinely heartfelt. Jessica interviewing local veterans, visiting VA hospitals, participating in volunteer projects, and sharing educational information about military life. "What's particularly compelling," Rebecca continued, "is how honest she's been about her own learning process. She posted this video last week that really went viral." She played a video where Jessica spoke directly to the camera. "3 weeks ago, I made one of the worst mistakes of my life. I met a service member, and based on nothing but my own prejudices and insecurities, I treated them with incredible disrespect. I can't share the details because I need to protect their privacy, but I can share what I learned from that encounter." Jessica's voice in the video was sincere and thoughtful. "I realized that I had been living in a bubble where I thought my problems and my perspective were the center of the universe. I had never taken the time to understand what military service actually means, what veterans go through, or how narrow my view of strength and sacrifice really was." The video continued with Jessica explaining her commitment to education and showing clips of her volunteer work at veteran service organizations. "I'm not trying to make myself look good or get praise for finally doing what I should have been doing all along. I'm sharing this because I know there are other people like me who have never really thought about what we owe to the people who serve our country." Rebecca paused the video. "The response has been incredible. Her engagement rates have tripled, but more importantly, veteran organizations are reporting increased volunteer applications and donations. People are saying they never thought about veteran issues before, but Jessica's honesty about her own ignorance made them want to learn more." Sarah was impressed despite herself. Jessica had clearly taken their conversation seriously and followed through on her commitment in a meaningful way. "What I find most interesting," Rebecca continued, "is that Jessica refuses to name the service member who inspired this change. She just refers to someone who taught me about real strength. Several people have tried to get her to reveal more details, but she consistently says that protecting their privacy is more important than her story." "That shows good judgment," Sarah said carefully. "It does, and it makes me curious about who this mysterious service member might be. Jessica's transformation seems very genuine, but it also seems like it was triggered by encountering someone pretty remarkable." Sarah smiled slightly. "In my experience, most service members are pretty remarkable. It doesn't take someone extraordinary to inspire that kind of reflection if someone is ready to listen." Rebecca nodded, making notes. Jessica mentioned that this person helped her understand that real confidence doesn't need external validation, and real strength doesn't require proving itself to others. She said it was the most important lesson anyone had ever taught her. "Sounds like she met someone with good perspective on leadership principles." Can you tell me more about how civilian-military interactions typically work in a city like San Diego? Do you think most civilians understand what military service involves? Sarah considered the question. I think most civilians have good intentions but limited understanding. Military and civilian cultures have grown apart over the past few decades. Many civilians don't personally know anyone in military service, so their understanding comes from movies, news coverage, or stereotypes that may not reflect reality. What kinds of stereotypes do you encounter? The usual range. Some people assume all military members are aggressive or authoritarian. Others assume we're all damaged by trauma. Some think we're heroes who can do no wrong. Others think we're victims who need constant sympathy. Most people don't see us as complex individuals with our own personalities, interests, and perspectives outside of our military service. Rebecca was taking detailed notes. Jessica mentioned something about learning that assumptions can be dangerous, that you never know someone's story just by looking at them. That's true in any context, Sarah agreed. Military service is just one example. Everyone you meet has experiences, skills, and perspectives that might surprise you if you took the time to learn about them. Have you seen changes in how your community views the military recently? I think social media has created opportunities for better understanding, but also for spreading misinformation. When influencers like Jessica use their platforms responsibly to educate people, it can be very positive. But it requires genuine commitment to learning, not just surface-level gestures. Rebecca showed Sarah another post from Jessica's account, a photo from a veteran job fair where Jessica was helping register participants. The caption read, "Still learning, still listening, still working to understand perspectives outside my own experience. Today, I met Marine veterans transitioning to civilian careers, Coast Guard families dealing with deployment challenges, and Navy personnel whose work I can't even begin to comprehend. Every conversation reminds me how much I don't know and how much I want to learn." She's maintained this level of engagement for 3 weeks now, Rebecca noted. Her followers have started sharing their own stories about veterans in their families or communities. It's created this ripple effect of people paying attention to military issues who never had before. Sarah was genuinely surprised by the sustained effort Jessica had put in. That's encouraging. Real change requires consistent commitment, not just initial enthusiasm. There's actually going to be a fundraising event next month. Jessica partnered with several local veteran organizations to create a day of education and service. She's using her platform to promote it, but she's insisted that the focus be on the organizations and veterans, not on her. What kind of event? Morning volunteer sessions at different veteran service locations, afternoon educational panels with veterans speaking about their experiences, evening fundraising dinner. Jessica's covering most of the costs herself, and all the proceeds go to the participating organizations. Sarah nodded approvingly. That sounds like a substantial commitment of time and resources. It is, and she's maintained her position about not revealing details about the service member who inspired this change. People have offered her money for an exclusive interview, but she refuses to compromise their privacy. Rebecca closed her notebook and looked at Sarah directly. "Commander, I have to ask, do you know anything about this mysterious encounter that started Jessica's transformation? The timing and location suggest it happened here in San Diego, and your unit has been getting more community attention lately." Sarah met her gaze steadily. "Ms. Martinez, I interact with a lot of civilians in my personal time. If one of them learned something valuable from our conversation, I'm glad about that. But I would never break someone's confidence by discussing private interactions, just like Jessica has chosen to protect privacy rather than gain publicity." Rebecca smiled knowingly, but didn't push further. That's exactly the kind of response I would expect from someone with real integrity. After Rebecca left, Sarah sat in her office thinking about the unexpected consequences of that Friday night encounter. She had hoped to teach Jessica a lesson about assumptions and respect, but she hadn't anticipated the broader impact that one conversation might have. Her phone buzzed with a text from Kelly Chen. "Commander, I wanted you to know that Jessica's work with veteran organizations has been incredible to watch. She's put in over 100 volunteer hours in the past 3 weeks and raised almost $50,000 for veteran services. The woman you met at that bar 3 weeks ago is completely different from the woman you met last Friday." Thank you for believing she could change. Sarah smiled and typed back, "Thank you for being a good friend to her through this process. Real change is hard work, and she's clearly committed to doing that work." That evening, Sarah drove past the Grand Hyatt on her way home from base. The rooftop bar was busy with the usual Friday night crowd, but she felt no need to stop. The lesson she had intended to teach had been learned, and more importantly, it had grown into something bigger than either she or Jessica had originally imagined. Her secure phone rang with an operational update from Stevens. "Commander, we've got new intelligence on tomorrow's training exercise. Can you come in early to review the modified scenarios?" "On my way," Sarah replied, already turning toward the base. Her real work continued: the classified operations, the strategic planning, the responsibility for lives and national security that most people would never see or understand. But now she knew that somewhere in San Diego, a woman named Jessica Thompson was using her platform to help bridge the gap between civilian and military communities. She was educating people about veteran issues, promoting service and sacrifice, and showing her followers that admitting ignorance was the first step toward wisdom. It wasn't the outcome Sarah had planned when she walked into that rooftop bar 3 weeks ago, but it was better than anything she could have orchestrated. Jessica had taken a moment of personal humiliation and transformed it into a genuine commitment to growth and service to others. As Sarah drove through the base gates, she reflected on the unexpected ways that individual encounters could ripple outward to affect entire communities. She had spent her career thinking about large-scale strategic operations, but sometimes the most important victories happened one conversation at a time. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, and new responsibilities. But tonight, she was satisfied knowing that her response to one drunk woman's poor behavior had somehow contributed to positive change in her community. It was a reminder that leadership meant teaching through example, even when you didn't know anyone was watching or learning. The work continued, as it always had and always would. But now that work included the knowledge that even small acts of dignity and restraint could have consequences far beyond their immediate moment. And sometimes, those consequences made the world a little bit better than it was before.